Today we're going on crusade to purge some Xenos and heretics, with a full review of Index Astartes Black Templars and which rules I think are strongest for them in 9th. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today we're going to go through all of the unique options for Black Templars and talk about all the tricks that these zealous space knights can bring to bear. I'm partly making this video as revision for myself to go over all of their options, seeing as I have a tournament coming up, and I know that I'm going to be playing against Implausible Nature, a really excellent Black Templars YouTube channel, and I'm sure they'll be giving me a masterclass lesson in how to get cut apart by power swords and bolters. I totally recommend checking out their YouTube channel if you do want some great Black Templars tactics videos. I'll put the link down in the video description. In my opinion, I'd say that Black Templars aren't immediately one of the strongest Space Marine factions right now, and are kind of interesting as a faction. I feel that comparatively their chapter tactic and combat doctrine aren't really the strongest, but they go a long way to making up for that by having a good selection of Warlord Traits, Relics, and unique Litanies. So currently to field a Black Templars army, you need the core Space Marine Codex and Index Astartes Black Templars, which you can download from Games Workshop. Black Templars are in a kind of in-between spot at the moment. Blood Angels, Space Wolves and Deathwatch all have their codexes released, and we know that Dark Angels are going to be updated with theirs sometime in early 2021. I strongly suspect that at least at some point down the line, Black Templars are going to get their own supplement book. They used to in the past, and compared with a lot of their codex brothers, they really have their own way of doing things, and a fair few of their own unique units and options. I think that they will get a book eventually, but it remains to be seen how long they'd have to wait. The index as it stands does a fairly reasonable job though, to be honest. They have 6 Warlord Traits, 6 Relics, 6 Litanies of the Devout, 8 Stratagems, and 5 Datasheets with 3 special characters and 2 units. Unlike every other chapter with a unique combat doctrine, they don't have any successor chapter options, as they themselves are technically a successor chapter of the Imperial Fists. Instead of having the extra damage against vehicles though, they get Knights of Sigismund, their own unique assault doctrine buff, which we'll get onto in just a second. So let's start out with the core Black Templars army rules. Their chapter tactics will allow them to reroll advances and charges, though it was slightly nerfed from their 8th edition version, where they could reroll any and all dice of the charges, which I think was a little bit more useful. It's a nice buff for any melee chapter to have. More chance of getting in combat is certainly a good thing, though compared with the Blood Angels one where it's +1 to charge, I'd say this might be just a little bit weaker, as you can't stack it with a command reroll, as of course you are already rerolling said charge. It is quite helpful on anything coming out of Deep Strike though, significantly upping the chance of getting in. They also have a 5+ feel no pain against mortal wounds, which certainly is no bad thing to have, though it is very matchup specific. You might have entire armies that you play that make absolutely no use of mortal wounds. At least in general in 9th edition, you don't tend to run into too many armies spamming loads of smite, though if you do run into Thousand Suns or Grey Knights, then you'll be glad to have this. In addition, if your entire force is Black Templars, you get the Knights of Sigismund Super Doctrine. This one augments your Assault Phase Doctrine, and it activates every time a Black Templar unit charges a non-vehicle target. Every hit roll that you make that's a 6 will auto-wound the target, you don't have to roll. This one's quite a nice one to have, though I would say it might not be quite as strong as doctrines such as the Space Wolf, Blood Angel, or White Scar ones. The buff is really specific depending on what unit is charging, and it's actually vastly more powerful on lower strength weapons compared with higher strength ones, as the higher strength weapons would wound most of the time anyway. That means it's really quite good with chainswords, which have received a bit of a buff in the Astartes chainsword in the new Space Marine Codex, and things like power swords, which might be wounding on 4s against Gravis Marines for example. It does have some annoying restrictions though. It isn't just on the first round of combat in general, it's only if you actually make a charge, and it doesn't apply against vehicles either, which again is kind of annoying, as the auto wounds would be really good against high toughness vehicles. Finally, if you're playing Black Templars, they're restricted to not having any librarians in their force. I'd say this isn't really the biggest deal in the world, they're by no means mandatory to a competitive Space Marine list. Probably the biggest sting is losing Might of Heroes and the Psychic Fortress buff where you get everyone a 5+ invul save. But with the Black Templars Litanies of the Devout, it does give you access to your own set of very decent buffs that other chapters don't get. So with going through their unique rules, let's start with Stratagems first. First of all, we have Devout Push, which I talked about in detail in a previous video. This one's a 1 command point 1 that allows any Black Templars infantry or bikers to make a pile-in move at the start of the fight phase, even if it's not in engagement range. It's just ridiculously powerful, as it allows you to kind of break the game by getting Black Templars into melee that shouldn't usually have been able to make a charge. It means that you can get a squad out of a moving impulsor and get them in combat. You can have them fall back and then use this to get back into combat, or you can use it as a kind of heroic intervention type ability at the start of your opponent's fight phase. You can also use it to avoid Overwatch as well, as that piling move isn't technically a charge. There's just so many good uses for this, and I would expect to see it used quite a lot by good Black Templar generals. Next up we have Oaths of Honor. This one allows scout units to reroll wound rolls, provided they charged or did make a charge, but I think it's a bit less useful now scouts aren't going to be used quite as much, now they only have 1 wound and everyone else has 2. I don't believe that you can use this on Crusader squads, seeing as they have both initiates and neophytes in them. Next we have Vicious Riposte for 1 command point, and this one allows you to bounce back a whole load of your opponent's damage straight back at them, as when your Black Templars unit is charged by an enemy unit, every saving throw that you make of a 6 will inflict 1 mortal wound back at the enemy unit that dealt the damage. Could be really good on any enemy unit that's trying to drown you in attacks. In particular, things like Orc Boys or Demonettes come to mind, where you're going to inflict a fair few casualties in return. It does have the stipulation, though, that once you fail your last save, you don't get to keep on making saves after the rest of your models are dead, even if the attacks all came at the same time. Kind of situational, but could potentially be really powerful if one of your units or characters is getting massively swarmed. Next we have Abhor the Witch for 1 command point, a nice simple deny psychic power on a 4+ when it manifests within 24 inches of a Black Templars unit. Maybe not quite as powerful now you can't command reroll that 4+ dice roll, but having a 50-50 chance to turn off some spells such as Warp Time could be horrendously powerful and really throw a spanner in the works for the opponent's army. Crusader Relics for 1 command point allows you to give a Sergeant Relic, either the Witchseeker Bolt, Sword of Judgment, or Skull of the Cacodominus. We'll get onto those in a second. Perhaps Witchseeker Bolts could be kind of fun on an Eliminator Sergeant perhaps. The Sword of Judgment could also really amp up a power sword if you gave one to a squad sergeant instead of a fist or hammer. Next, the Emperor's Will costs 1 command point. This one can be a great tool for getting an early charge. You use it in the movement phase, and a Black Templar's infantry unit can advance, shoot their pistols, and also charge in the same turn. A really powerful way of getting one of your fighter units into melee, both really good on slow moving units such as Blade Guard, or maybe trying to get a first turn charge out of some Vanguard veterans. With reroll advances and reroll charges, your unit's going to be going a very long way indeed. Shock and Awe is 1 command point and is trying to make some use out of Land Raider Crusaders, and after some infantry get out of a Land Raider Crusader, they can't be overwatched, and in the ensuing melee they're -1 to hit as well. I still feel that Land Raider Crusaders are kind of underwhelming at the moment, unfortunately, but if you are going down the route for fluff reasons, then this one could be situationally useful, maybe if you're charging into the midst of a Tau battle line and ignoring all that overwatch, or you're expecting to be hit back hard and you want some extra survivability for your unit. Finally though, for 2 command points, I've saved Tenacious Assault till last, which is another one of the most powerful Black Templar stratagems. If an enemy infantry squad tries to fall back from a Black Templars infantry squad, then roll a dice and on a 2+, the enemy unit can't fall back this turn. Being able to lock enemy units in close combat is just so powerful. It's particularly good if you have a Black Templars unit that charged into something and killed it, then piled into something else. Your opponent won't be able to fall back with that unit, won't be able to shoot your unit, and hopefully you might be able to kill whatever you piled into in the enemy's turn. If you're playing a fairly gunliney army without too much melee damage, then this could be absolutely brutal against them. You could potentially have a Black Templar squad march through their entire army with little to no chance of them ever being shot. Overall for the stratagems, there's 3 great ones for combat: Devout Push or the Emperor's Will to get you there safely, Tenacious Assault to ruin your enemy's plan to get away, and plenty of the others are very situationally useful. Next we move on to the Black Templars Warlord Traits, of which we have 6, though to be honest out of all of them, Frontline Commander really stands out to me. It's +1 to advance and charge, and it just synergizes amazingly with the chapter tactic, and I think is going to be the go-to one in most Black Templar armies. Just theoretically, if you were trying to get a unit of 6-inch moving Space Marines across the table, maybe some Blade Guard veterans, if you have them within the radius for Frontline Commander, and also use the Emperor's Will to advance and charge, after all the re-rolls for advancing and for charging, your Black Templar squad has an average threat range of 20 inches. Obviously this gets even better if you're comboing it with something like Vanguard veterans. It's really good out of Deep Strike as well. Having an 8-inch charge with automatic re-rolling will get you there more often than not, and it's quite nice that you don't have to roll for it like you would have to with a Chaplain Listening. The others just aren't quite as good in my opinion. I'd likely be more tempted by the Imperium's Sword, just to make one of your commanders extra fighty. The options are Oathkeeper, which gives you a 6-inch heroic intervention, which the Emperor's Champion has, Epitome of Piety, which allows you to deny 1 power and gives you +1 to that deny roll. Grimaldus has that one, and when taken on him, it does make him really quite good psychic defense to be fair. Paragon of Fury gives you a 2+ chance to inflict a mortal wound on the charge. I'd rather take the Imperium's Sword over that, as I think you're going to get more damage out of that on average. Master of Arms gives you always fights first, which I don't think is all that useful when it's just on one unit. And Inspirational Fighter makes core units within 6 inches have a better AP by -1 when they roll a 6 to wound. This one's a melee damage buff, but I would stress that it's quite a small one, and it doesn't exactly work very well with Knights of Sigismund, which will mean that you're rolling less wound rolls to start with. Frontline Commander is just very good, and what's more, Helbrecht himself gets it, which further makes him a better option in my eyes. Next up, we move on to the Black Templars Relics, which I feel are a bit better on the whole. They have 3 ones that I consider really solid. My favourites are the Crusader Helm, which gives you +3 inch to your auras, which is nice in itself, but even better, it allows one of your Black Templar units within 6 inches to go into the Assault Doctrine early on turn 1 or turn 2. Could be very nasty indeed for an alpha striking unit, say something like those Vanguard veterans bounding forward with the Emperor's Will stratagem. +3 inches to auras is always good as well, really solid on a captain, could be useful on an apothecary as well, which would give him a 6 inch aura of Feel No Pain. My other 2 favourites are the Aurelian Shroud and the Ancient Breviary. The Aurelian Shroud is a once per game bonus, where at the start of a battle round, models within 3 inches acquire themselves a 4+ invul save for core units and characters. This could make one of your Space Marine squads just ridiculously hardy for a turn. I think it's best used on something with a 3+ armor save, in particular things like Redemptor Dreadnoughts come to mind, where they're just going to be really annoying to shift between Duty Eternal, loads of wounds, and a 4+ invul save that they shouldn't really have. Might be good on Gravis armoured units though, things like Eradicators, Aggressors or Plasma Scepters are also good picks. Finally, the Ancient Breviary can give you one of the most reliable Chaplain Litanies in the game. Each time you use Litanies, you roll 2d6 and discard one of the dice, so your Litanies should be going off 8 out of every 9 times if a Chaplain has this. With the Black Templar Litanies being quite as strong as they are, this one's a really good option for a Chaplain, and is very nearly in auto-include territory for me. I find the others not quite on the same level, to be honest. The Witch Seeker bolts give you a single bolt shot that can target Psykers, and if it hits then they do D3 mortal wounds to them. Could be good if you're allowed to list tailor to your opponent, though against take all comers I think it's kind of questionable. The Skull of Cacodominus is kind of rubbish in my opinion. It's a once per game effect when a Psyker casts a power within 12 inches of you and takes D3 mortal wounds on the roll of a 2+. Useless if your opponent doesn't have any Psykers, and useless if they choose to cast out of that range. Finally, the Sword of Judgment is +1 strength, AP -3 and damage 3. Essentially a relic power sword with +1 damage. Not too bad against Gravis armoured Space Marines, though I must admit I'd be quite tempted to either pick up something like the Teeth of Terror or maybe a Power Fist or Thunderhammer. It just isn't really significantly better than those options. Still though, I think they have a very strong relic section. The Crusader's Helm and Ancient Breviary are both amazing, and the Aurelian Shroud can be really handy if you do build around it. We mentioned the Black Templars' unique litanies a few times already, and here are the Litanies of the Devout. You can pick these on a Chaplain instead of the standard litanies. Unfortunately you can't mix and match. There are a few very good options here though. Probably the most obvious strong one is the Litany of Divine Protection, the first one. You select a core or character unit within 6 inches, and they get a 5+ Feel No Pain type save until your next command phase. Basically an instant way to make any target obscenely tougher. It's just really good on multi-wound Space Marine infantry, making them really resistant to anything with flat 2 damage, and in a pinch you could always use it on a Dreadnought or the Chaplain themselves if you've got no one else to buff. Could be a very nice one to throw on a unit of Vanguard veterans or Blade Guard before zooming them up the board very fast into your opponent's face. Next we have the Psalm of Remorseless Persecution. This one gives you reroll wound rolls of 1 in the fight phase for core or character units within 6 inches. Essentially kind of a fight phase lieutenant in the place of 1 Litany. And to be honest, I don't think it's going to be taken very much. You could get the same via a lieutenant, and for Chaplain Litanies you're likely going to be better off with 4 rerolls to hit, or +1 to attack from the Fires of Devotion down below. Next we have the Vow of Retribution, which is an aura of -2 leadership. Maybe could be good in combination with some Reavers, but it is very matchup specific. Leadership only has so much effect in 9th edition, and I don't think it's worth building around. Fires of Devotion is much better though. You nominate 1 core or character unit, and they get +1 attack on the charge, or if they make a heroic intervention. Solid close combat buff there. You can't really go wrong if you want to make someone just hit a bit better. I can see you wanting this one more than the Litany of Hate sometimes, as it will still have some effect even if the unit or character moves out of range of the Chaplain's buff. Next we have Fervent Acclamation, which is an aura that buffs auras. Black Templars units within 6 inches have a +3 inch buff to their aura abilities to a maximum of 9 inches. Again, this one could be really useful on something like the Apothecary, could make him have a really big Feel No Pain type aura, but also good if you've got basically any character cluster, if you have captains or lieutenants nearby. Those reroll ones might be able to stretch out a bit further and reach out to any of your Black Templars that have crusaded their way into close combat. Finally, we have Oaths of Glory, which allow one core or character unit to fight first in the fight phase, which for the most part I'd say isn't all that useful. Typically if you've charged, then you're going to be fighting first anyway, and if the opponent charges you, they still get to nominate the first unit to fight first, so they could still fight before your Oaths of Glory unit. One potentially good use of it though is to combine it with Devout Push, where your Devout Pushed unit that's got into combat when it shouldn't have can now fight first as well, despite not technically having made a charge move. I'd say that these litanies are really strong. Most Black Templars army lists are going to include at least one chaplain, I think. I'd be very tempted by that new chaplain on bike, upgraded with 2 litanies via Master of Sanctity, and taking the Ancient Breviary so we can re-roll those to make them very reliable. My favourite on the list is that Litany of Divine Protection. Making one unit obscenely tough is great, and Fires of Devotion, Fervent Acclamation, and Oaths of Glory all have their uses, though I think you might often just want to use that Litany of Hate for full melee rerolls. So now let's move on to the Black Templars datasheets, starting out with High Marshal Helbrecht himself, who I think is a really solid choice for leading your crusade. He'll cost you 155 points, he gives the standard Captain reroll 1s to hit, and also those Chapter Master style full rerolls, or 1 Black Templar core or character unit. Furthermore, he gives a really interesting buff to Black Templars in melee. He has an aura of +1 strength to melee attacks, which can be really handy on things like chainswords or power fists. Strength 5 chainswords are just so much better than Strength 4, and Strength 9 power fists will be wounding even the toughest armor on 3s. Combined with his rerolls, he's just an absolutely excellent melee buffing character. His stat line's certainly not bad either. He's got 6 wounds, 5 attacks, and he hits with his Sword of the High Marshals, Strength 6, AP-3, Damage 2, and he gets plus D3 additional attacks with that if he's made a charge or a heroic intervention. Should average around about 8 with Shock Assault. He's got a Combi Melter for a little bit of shooting threat, and as we already mentioned, he has the Frontline Commander Warlord trait, which is really helpful as it's the one that you're most likely going to want in the Black Templars army. To be honest, my only criticism of Helbrecht is that he is just a little bit slow to get across the field, which does limit his use in being able to support really fast elements such as Vanguard veterans or other things that want to zoom forward at the enemy, but I certainly think he's a competitive choice for leading the Black Templars into battle. Next up we have Chaplain Grimaldus, who's a 95-point chaplain, and interestingly enough he has 2 litanies and is able to recite 2, though he doesn't appear to be a Master of Sanctity, meaning that you can also have one of them as well if you want to get loads of litanies on the go for relatively cheap. He's nothing particularly special stat line wise. He's got his Artificer Crozius, which is Strength 6 and Damage 2, and has a Plasma Pistol at range, but he does have another couple of really useful abilities. Firstly, his Devout Puritan rule allows him to take a Deny the Witch test, which is really handy just having one extra way to throw a spanner in the works for psychic armies, particularly on top of the stratagem that you can resist them on a 4+. Perhaps even better and more universally useful though is Unmatched Zeal. It's a 6-inch aura that affects Black Templar core units, and it gives them exploding 6s on their melee attacks. Every 6 generates an additional attack. To be honest, getting that exploding 6s rule on top of 2 litanies all on the same model for less than 100 points is really good value, and if you can deliver him into close combat alongside some fighty Black Templars, he's going to be absolutely worth his weight in gold. As support characters go, he's a very good value one. Finally, for the HQ section, we have none other than the rightly feared Emperor's Champion. Again, I think he's really good value at 85 points, one of the cheapest options for a Space Marine character, and although he doesn't provide any aura buffs, he really is an excellent melee combatant for the points, and if he ever catches up with an enemy character, they're going to be in for a very, very bad time. At base he has 5 attacks, so 6 with Shock Assault. He's going to be using the Black Sword, which is Strength 7, AP-3, and Damage 2. Not that effective against Toughness 8 units, but anything lower he's going to go through pretty quickly. Against characters though, he's absolutely ludicrous. He fights first automatically, he'll re-roll both hit rolls and wound rolls, and he gets +1 strength and +1 attack as well. Just for fun, if you math out the damage against say a Space Marine Librarian, that equates to him doing around about 10 or 12 wounds to him. And I think it's safe to say that pretty much any character in the game has a very good chance of dying in one round against this monster. Again, the real question is of delivery as he is on foot, but seeing as he's only 85 points, it's not really all that hard to justify as a countercharge threat. It could certainly make opponents really think about putting their characters anywhere near him. Next we come to the Cenobite Servitors. These guys are an interesting little unit, the ones that come alongside Grimaldus in the same kit. They're a little 3 model unit that's just 20 points, and they don't really have all that much combat ability to speak of. They're only strength and toughness 3, and they're just armed with a standard close combat weapon. Their main purpose is that they transform the 5+ Feel No Pain type save that Black Templars get against mortal wounds, and that becomes a 4+ to Black Templar units that are within 6 inches of this unit. Honestly though, I wouldn't be all that bothered about that particular buff. A really tiny infantry unit can actually be quite a boon in a Space Marine list. These guys are pretty much ideal choices for standing on objectives and doing actions, getting into table quarters, or even just screening out one corner of the battlefield for a turn. They're only 20 points, and while they don't add anything in terms of damage output, I think most of the time they will make the list slightly stronger. Finally, and perhaps least positively, we come to the Black Templars Crusader squad. These guys have a fairly complex data sheet, including 1 Sword Brother, 4 to 9 Initiates, and 0 to 10 Neophytes. The Initiates and Sword Brother are 18 points, and the Neophytes are 14. They basically have the stat line of a tactical squad, with the Neophytes having the stat line of a scout squad, and unlike tactical marines, all the Initiates can take chainswords. The unit does have a couple of other quirks. The Neophytes can reroll 1s to wound if there are at least that many Initiates in the unit, and one of the random Initiates could take a power weapon if they wished, though it's not particularly impressive on a 1-attack model. I'll be honest, I don't think that the Crusader squad is particularly strong in 9th, and I'd only really want to include them if I was just going down a fluffy Black Templars build, as opposed to trying to optimize them for combat. I guess in theory you could try and gain a bit of durability from the mixed unit profiles. You could take high strength multi-damage hits on the scouts, and low strength single damage shots on the Initiates, in theory making the unit a bit tougher. And there is something to be said for having an absolutely enormous unit of Space Marines up to 20 strong. It could get quite efficient in terms of getting buffs from Stratagems and Litanies. A full squad, though really quite expensive, would be a real pain to shift with 5+ Feel No Pain. For me though, I'd just really struggle to take these guys when there are the options of Vanguard Veterans, which you could run as Sword Brethren for the Black Templars, or Assault Intercessors in the troop slot, both of which I feel do the same job of a choppy infantry squad, but just that bit better. The Van Vets are only 1 more point than the Intercessors, and get 1 additional attack, which is kind of a bargain, plus they have far more flexible gear. And the Assault Intercessors also get that extra attack, and also have some really useful stratagems, such as Transhuman Physiology, or Fighting Twice. I've got no doubt that these guys could perform well in the right circumstances, but the vast majority of the time I think that something else might likely have performed even better. I do find it a shame about the Crusader squads, but to be honest, besides them, I think that the Black Templars' unique datasheets are already quite powerful, and they all have decent reasons to include them in a list. Finally, I thought we'd just round up by talking about a 2,000 point Black Templars army list, and I thought it might make sense to showcase one by Ben Cherwine, who I'd also like to apologise for spelling your name wrong on this slide. Ben's one of the best Black Templar players out there, and has placed really well at multiple big tournaments in 9th edition. This list is a Vanguard detachment, an interesting choice not to go with any troops whatsoever, but I think that's really quite fun. You can have absolutely no holding back, and just overload the enemy with a whole load of elite threat units. To lead the crusade, there's Helbrecht, who is the Warlord with Frontline Commander, and the Primaris Chaplain on bike, who's a Master of Sanctity with Divine Protection for the 5+ Feel No Pain, and Fires of Devotion for the extra attack. With that massive movement, he'll be able to get those buffs where he needs them, and they'll be going off very efficiently with Ancient Breviary. Finally, for characters, there's a Primaris Apothecary with the Crusader's Helm, good for getting some early assault doctrine, but perhaps even better for getting a 6+ Feel No Pain aura in a 6-inch radius. From there, most of the rest of the list is just a whole ton of threatening units. There's 2 units of 3 Blade Guard, good for bullying their way to the midfield, a unit of Assault Terminators with Thunderhammer and Storm Shield, who could potentially deep strike or bully their way up the board with a 5+ Feel No Pain, a unit of 8 Vanguard Veterans with Lightning Claws and Storm Shields. The Sergeant has a Power Fist. As we mentioned, with Advance and Charge, they could be getting first turn charges quite easily. A unit of 3 Attack Bikes with Multi-Melters for some solid ranged punch. As their core units, they might be able to get 4 rerolls to hits from Helbrecht if they need. 5 Inceptors with Plasma Exterminators, which seem to be a staple in every second Space Marine list these days. And along that same theme, a unit of 5 Eradicators with Melter Rifles. Could be a reasonable choice for putting in Strategic Reserve if the situation dictated it. Finally, we have that unit of Cenobite Servitors, which could be a really cheap way to hold down a table quarter or an objective. And finally, perhaps the most interesting choice for me, a Whirlwind with Castellan Missiles. I guess that could be kind of helpful for clearing away some chaff troops on some far-flung objectives, and it also does give you the Suppression Fire stratagem as well, which could get rid of Overwatch on a unit if it is going to make a meaningful difference. I guess the Whirlwind could be a good choice for sitting on a home objective as well. It'd take a fair amount of firepower to shift, and it's not likely to be the top of your opponent's priority list faced with all these threats. Overall, it's just a really flexible and scary list. Some great units to make the most of the Black Templars' chapter tactics and stratagems with those Assault Terminators, Vanguard Vets and Blade Guard. combined with some of the standard fearsome Space Marine shooting with multi-melter attack bikes, Inceptors and Eradicators. I really like the way that the list is just quite so varied. The only repeated unit within the army are 2 small units of Blade Guard. So hope you enjoyed a bit of a rundown of Black Templars in 9th. As always, if there's anything that I've missed, or any interesting tactics or combos that I've overlooked, please let me know down in the comments below, and I'll post any corrections as a pinned comment if necessary. I do think that Black Templars can perform well in 40k, they are Space Marines after all, and have access to a lot of really strong gear, and they do have plenty of their own nasty tricks, certainly with their melee related stratagems, which are really interesting compared with some of the other melee chapters. If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we'll have plenty of other 40k content coming out every single day, and I highly recommend giving Implausible Nature a look if you are into Black Templar strategy. I will put the link down in the video description. Finally, if you have been enjoying my videos, I would just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page, which you can also find down in the video description. Making all of these videos does take a fair amount of time, and if you are enjoying regularly, any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry to the channel's prize giveaways, which happen every month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.